You are listening to the Nightly News Podcast, the voice of the Knights.
Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and I'm so honored to be joined by members of the Central Penn Knights baseball team. Nightly News co-president Dalton Koller here to talk a little bit more about the season with a couple of his teammates. So, Dalton, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to do this every year. It's always a great time.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Of course, we're also being joined by Brady Park, one of the you're a senior this year, right? So this will be your fourth year playing?
This will be my third year.
Third year.
It's going to be my last year. Yes.
Okay. Well, we're so glad to have you today. We're also going to be hearing from Tyler Haynes in the second part of the show today. So, gentlemen, I wanted to start off with some really important stuff. I want to take a look back at last year. Now, Dalton, I know that we had you and Kevon on sort of the wrap-up show last year, and it was probably the best wrap-up show we ever could have possibly had. But I do want to sort of jump back in the time machine and just kind of decompress last year now that you've had some time to think about it and it's rolled around in your head for the last, 10 months?
Yeah, something like that.
So first of all, obviously, and we can go through some of the game-by-game stuff, but just generally speaking, I mean, how did last season feel now that you've had some time to sort of bask in the glow of back-to-back ESAC championships? I mean, as you look back at last season, what were some of the things that you really remember and still stick out to you?
Honestly, I think the biggest thing I remember was just the large amount of people that we had coming in that made an immediate impact. And obviously we had some of the people that stood up and stepped up and were big parts of the team, like Zach Boyer, Owen Zell, all those guys. And I think the biggest thing was just the fact that it went from Bucks County being our main rivals, the ones where we go back and forth, to Williamson Trade, which obviously the first 2 years we were here, not to be disrespectful, but they weren't as good. But last year they had some great players and they got a lot of pitching and they were going head to head a lot of our games against them.
I don't think you're being disrespectful at all. I mean, I've been a part of the broadcasts here since 2017, 2018, and frankly, we never really had too much of an issue with Williamson. So kudos to them for a good season last year, and certainly I remember the game that we played against Williamson. That was really tough. I mean, it was two nail biters back last year on April 23rd, a 7-3 and an 8-5 game. I mean, those were two of the more memorable games that I had getting to call those games. So of course we can again talk about some of those games coming up. But Brady, as you look back to last year, what are some of the fondest memories that you have of the second of the back-to-back ESAC championships?
Well, I mean, you said it. Winning back-to-back ESAC championships, that's a tremendous feat that not a lot of people can say they had back-to-back championships, let alone one championship. So I'd say that's a highlight in itself. Us coming together as a team to do it, that's probably the next best thing on that list. The amount of freshmen that we had come in last year, and as Dalton said, them coming in and making an immediate impact, it helped us tremendously.
Well, and I certainly appreciate that the fact that this is a team sport of really any team sports, probably one of the most important, that you're all on the same page as a team. So I do want to go back and kind of look at how last year worked, sort of similar to this year. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but last year you started off at Mid-Atlantic Christian and you didn't get the 3 scheduled games in. Of course, last year you got 2 in. This year 1. Now the big difference between last year and this year is you were actually victorious in your first game this season. We can hold the thoughts there. Last year you started off with 2 losses on the season, and then didn't turn around and play another game for almost another 3 weeks. You had a couple of games postponed in early March, and then you came back for a split with Penn State Schuylkill. So how was it last year? Now, again, ESAC champions the year before. You come in, you lose a couple of tough games to a really tough Mid-Atlantic Christian team, and then you don't play for another 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, again, growing up in Pennsylvania, playing baseball in Pennsylvania, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into in those early months. It's going to be cold, raining, a lot of snow, or just any inclement weather that doesn't prevent you from playing baseball. But I think we did a really good job last year with staying prepared during that time. I mean, 3 weeks, that's a lot of time not being on a field and playing baseball.
Now, where do you train, just for the listeners out there, where do you train during the winter months or the cool months when you can't go out on the field and get outside?
So the last couple of years, we were at the Keystone Nationals, their indoor facility. But now that we have our new head coach, Chaz, he has his own facility that we work. It's called Every Time Athletics, that we train there pretty much every single night that we can get in there. We're in there for...
He has his own facility?
He owns it. Yeah, there's a couple people that own it, but basically he's it's honestly his, not his facility, but there's a couple people that
he has the ability to
Yes.
be there when he needs to be there.
Yes.
Wow, that's really cool. And where is this facility?
It's down on Derry Street in Harrisburg. It's really close to the McDevitt High School, right along the train tracks down there.
Gotcha. Well, that's really cool. So, it is tough 3 weeks after you get sort of off the schneid. You're kind of dealing with that again right now, but again, we'll hold that for the second part of the show. From there, a Williamson trade loss back on March 13th again, and we're talking last season here. Of course, you did win that second game 17-4, but just curious. Okay, so you started off 1-3. You're going into an ESAC conference game with Williamson, and they come out and they beat you 12-11. Do you remember that game? What do you take away from that game, or what memories do you have?
I remember it very well. That was easily... Obviously, our game later in the year, the ESAC Championship, was much more memorable just because of the stakes and all. But that game was insane. There was many times where I remember just sitting on the hill. I didn't play that game, but I remember sitting on the hill next to the dugout and just watching everything go down. I'm like, oh my God, this is a way different Williamson trade team than what we've seen the last 2 years. They have come to play. They got good pitching. They're hitting the ball really well. I remember the kid Joe Kelly that hit one. I didn't even, because I was talking to someone when it happened, I didn't even see it get hit. I just heard it. I heard the ping and I watched it go flying over. I'm like, oh my God.
If I recall correctly from years prior, Grande, Kelly, Illing, they had been a part of that team. And for Williamson, it was never really the bats.
Oh, no.
It was always just the pitching.
Yeah.
They didn't have the pitching to match up with a pretty darn good lineup. But last year, they did have some solid pitching that kept them competitive in the ESAC. And honestly, when you look at the game and you look at the box score, 3-3 bottom of the third, and then it's 4-3, Knights pull ahead, and then bottom 5 runs. And then, of course, Knights come back with 2 runs and then tack 5 more on in the top of the 7th, only to allow 4 runs in the bottom of the 7th to allow that walk-off victory for Williamson. Again, in hindsight, this isn't something I normally would want to bring up, talking about these losses. Of course, you're the champions, right? So all's well that ends well. But that had to be sort of a wake-up call for you, wouldn't you say? I mean, early in the season, you have all aspirations of returning at a minimum to the ESAC title game. To go into a rival early in the season when you've only got a few games under your belt, to lose that first game, what was it like to come back in that second game? What resilience did that show the Knights coming back 17-4 in that second game last March 13th?
I think it just really woke us up, like you mentioned. Not even going into the season, going into that game, we were in the line stretching. We were like, okay, it's Williamson trade. We know we get to obviously 1-3 start is not ideal, but we can get 2 wins here easily if we just do what we're supposed to do. And then to have that roller coaster game, we were like, oh my God. All right, we gotta hone in a little bit more here and pay attention to what we're doing. And then obviously that second game, that was just us being fully locked in, realizing what the assignment was, and we just did what we were supposed to do.
Well, the interesting thing about that Williamson trade game is you went on, as you won the second game 17-4, to win 8 consecutive games. The first, of course, against Williamson, but then you ended up winning a doubleheader against Delaware County, a doubleheader at home, Penn State Hazleton, a doubleheader at home against Bucks, and all the way back to a split with Christianum all the way on April 7th. So was that the motivating factor, that first Williamson game that didn't go your way, Brady, would you say?
It definitely was, and that would be 2 years in a row, at least that I've been here, that we went on a long string of wins after a tough loss. But I would definitely say us going into that game, knowing that we had to do something to win, and then coming back the next game, and I believe what was the score again in that game?
17-4.
17-4, yeah. It lit a fire under us, and we for sure took that personally and got right back to work and did what we should have been doing the whole season.
I mean, it was a pretty incredible lineup from, I mean, you're seeing there were 13 walks in the game on top of 12 hits, so 25 base runners, 15 RBI, including 5 from Roniel Morel in one of his big games of the season. But honestly, as we look back, like, very impressive. So not only did you win that game big, you went on the road to Delaware County and won a 32-1 game and an 18-1 game back-to-back. And then again, 2 big victories at home, Penn State Hazleton, and then Bucks last year. I remember those games. That was one of the first days of break. And this was, like, obviously our first couple of games that we got to see you. What was it like to go out there, especially with the heated rivalry you guys have had over the years, to beat Bucks back-to-back games at FMB Field?
I mean, obviously, I always say this: having the playing the home opener at home, it's always great. It's always a great time, and especially against a conference, and not even just a conference rival, just a rival in general with Bucks County the last 2 years. How the first year when I was here, we lost in the ESAC Championship to them, and then the year after that, then we came back and won it. I mean, it was just great. I mean, obviously, we were already on that winning streak, so we're already feeling really good about ourselves. And like, all right, well, the thing is, we're playing against Delaware County, which they were definitely understaffed and didn't have a lot of people. And then Hazleton was a pretty solid team. We beat them handily. I was like, okay. I was like, well, listen, now this is a rivalry game. This is what we're looking forward to. And the fact that we came out and just took care of business was really, really big for team morale.
And I don't know how intricately you recall these individual games, but how big was Colton Zerby's start in the second game of that Bucks County doubleheader? He went 5 innings, 2 hits, 1 run, 8 strikeouts.
No, yeah, he's a battler. I mean, he's a gamer. Every time you need him to go out there, whether it's you need him for 1 inning, you need him for 3, you need him for 5 or 6, he can go out and do it.
Brady, you caught that game, right?
I did catch that game.
Do you recall that game?
I remember it, yes, very vividly, because I remember talking to him, like, how do you want to attack this lineup? And he said that he wanted to pound the strike zone mainly with fastballs, and that's exactly what he did. And stats don't lie. It worked. It helped us win that game for sure.
I always wonder how intricately you remember these individual games. Like, for me, for whatever reason, I struggle trying to pull like individual memories about individual things. Like, I can reflect on it and remember like how I felt maybe afterward, but there are very few games that I can go back, even that I called, that I can remember individual details really outside of the ESAC Championship game last year. I'll never forget that game as long as I live. And of course, we'll get to that here in a minute. Now, April 7th rolls around. You're on this massive winning streak against Christendom, and then you proceed to lose 5 of 6, including 3 consecutive home games and 4 out of 5 at home against, you lost the second game at Christendom, 2 against Brandywine, 1 against Schuylkill, and 1 of 2 against Lehigh. So where are you sitting here? You're getting close to the end of the season, midway through April, so you're on this massive run. Can you point to anything in those games that caused that losing streak over that sort of week and change?
I remember the second game against Christendom, which was the start of that rough stretch, and I remember it also just because I started that game, and it was a very tight game. And
you can't hang your head. You only allowed 1 earned run.
Yeah, I remember that because also that was one of the starts where I was kind of like just knowing that, okay, this is what we're getting into. Because just from the beginning, for me personally with my starts, I can tell where the offense is going to be, both ours and theirs. Their pitcher that second game was doing really good, and he was honestly just pounding the zone and getting a lot of weak contact. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to have to be on my A game. I remember that game. It was so frustrating because we had so many chances to just put them away, and we didn't. And obviously, that was kind of the thing for that entire losing streak that we went on. We just had many times that we could have taken over games, and we just didn't. And when the other team that we played, they capitalized on our mistakes, and we didn't capitalize on theirs, and that was just the big difference.
What about some of these other games that I'd mentioned there in the middle? So home games against Penn State, Brandywine, and Schuylkill, and then a split in the net against Lehigh Carbon.
Penn State Brandywine is a really, really good school. I mean, they're NCAA D3, so that's always going to be a tough matchup. But in years past, we had hung with them pretty well. I think it was kind of just one of our, not even just for those games in general, but one of our main problems the entirety last year was errors. Errors was a really, really big issue for us, both infield, outfield, all over the field. There'd be so many times where we have chances to get out of innings really relatively quickly, and then our pitchers having to end up throwing to 3 or 4 more guys just because we give them free outs. And it's at certain times with certain pitchers, it just kind of piled up.
To your point, the second game of Brandywine, a 10-1 loss, 5 errors. And again, we're not here to call people out for making errors because it's part of the game and it happens. But of course, to your point, that certainly doesn't help, especially when you're playing a team that good. Like you have to play a perfect game to not necessarily to hang with them, but to win those games. But I will point out, so you did split with Lehigh Carbonate in the net, and then you proceeded to win 2 in a row. You lost a game at Chenango, and then you won 8 in a row, all the way up to Manor at the end of the season. Of course, did drop a game to Albright and did drop a game to Bucks before winning the second game of Bucks at Bucks. And then, of course, we'll talk about the ESAC Championship game. What fueled that? Now, again, a lot of home games here in these winning streaks. Williamson Trade, Christendom Manor, back-to-back, that 6-game stretch right there, followed by a doubleheader sweep at Manor. What happened in that that's in a 7-day span that you basically won 8 games in a row? What happened there? It's sort of like this roller coaster, right? You start off a little low, then you hit this high note, and then you drop down a little bit of the season, and then you come back up out of nowhere and just, go on this epic run.
Yeah, I think part of it was we had a lot of discussions around this time about during that losing streak. We had a lot of discussions about accountability and people not knowing, not understanding their roles and kind of just like being a little too selfish. And it was around that time where we had a lot of not necessarily team bonding experiences, but we had coming together and realizing, hey, this is not the way we want this, this team chemistry and atmosphere to be. We got to switch some things around. And then after that, we found something that worked and we just kind of ran with it.
Talk about the complete game 7-3 victory at Williamson Trade last April.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I was easily one of my more memorable favorite starts that I've had in my career. And I just remember from the very get-go being angry. So obviously, because that first game we played Williamson Trade early in the year with that roller coaster that we lost. Also, the big thing though was they showed up an hour and a half late.
I remember this because so we usually get there anywhere from baseball. We're usually there about an hour early because we have to set up the cameras, do a test, and everything. And we're sitting there. It's about quarter till. We usually take our seats about quarter till. And Steve looks over at me and he says, is the other team even here yet? Because usually we're just sort of in our own, doing our own thing, not even paying attention. You guys are always on the field working out before we get started, so we don't even think about it. And then I saw you walking by. I'm like, Dalton, what's going on? He's like, I don't know. Like, we have no idea where they are. So we're just kind of sitting there wondering. And then finally, somebody, I don't even remember who it was, whether it was Casey or someone, was like, yeah, they'll be here in about 45 minutes. I'm like, I mean, just as well as I do, like, you can't just get off the bus and start playing. You at least got to give them some reps on the field. So we're not going to get into that. But I do remember having some conversations with you in the past about how, in a way, that really motivated you to, step up your game, because not only did you know that this was a really important ESAC game, but they had beaten you already this season. Now they're coming into here and disrespecting FNB Field at that. So here's one of the issues I just want to leave before I let you respond to that. We didn't even know if we were going to get to play both games, because FNB Field, we only have the field until a certain time, and by them being late, that almost could have sacrificed one of those victories, which you never know what impact that's going to have. So, tell me a little bit more about this game and how that whole situation actually got you a little bit more amped up to go into the start.
Yeah, so I remember coming in, I think it was honestly the day before, where the Williamson Trade coach had contacted Coach Stern and said that, look, we have a lot of guys that are coming out of class, so we're going to be like half an hour later than what we expected. So then as a response, we showed up a little bit later than we would regularly show up for a game. We usually show up like 2 hours before if it's a home game. But, I mean, we got there. I start warming up and doing my warm routine like I usually do before a start. I remember I'm warming up in the outfield. Stern walks all the way out, and he goes, yo, they're going to be later than even they originally told us. And I was like, So I literally just went, I walked into the dugout and just sat there for half an hour, just not doing anything. And then the whole time I'm sitting there, I'm just getting more and more angry because I'm like, this is ridiculous. How I had to completely stop my routine midway, and I'm going to have to start it up all over again. I had a little pep talk with Coach before the game, talking about like, hey, this is a big game. I need you to go out there. I'm like, you got it. And then from the very get-go, I was ready.
So that from that big start, back-to-back wins versus Christian, and I actually forgot that you guys played at Susquehanna Township High School for Manor. I was unable to do that game. I totally forgot that you did that, but hey, won 2 of those and then right back at Manor before coming into the ESAC Championship game. I want to take just a short break, and we'll come right back and we'll start talking about the ESAC Championship game, and then we'll talk a little bit more about a preview for this season. All right, so stay tuned. We'll be right back with the Nightly News Podcast.
This is Dalton Koller, co-president of Nightly News Media Club and broadcaster for the basketball games. You are listening to the Nightly News Podcast.
All right, back here with the Nightly News Podcast, here with Brady Park, the catcher of the Central Penn Knights, along with his battery mate, Dalton Koller, the co-president of the Nightly News. And we're also going to welcome Tyler Haynes. Tyler, a freshman on the Central Penn Knights baseball team, going to help us take a look forward at Knights baseball for 2025. So, Tyler, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Is this your first podcast?
This is my first podcast I've ever been on.
Well,
this is exciting stuff.
I appreciate that. We look forward to having you back, later in a season, and certainly in the future. You're always welcome. So I do want us to take time, before we flash forward here to 2025, to take a look back at that Williamson Trade ESAC Championship game. Frankly, I got to be honest, and I'm sure you guys have too, I'm pretty sure I've watched this game from start to finish at least 5, 6, 7 times, at least, because I will never forget the moment when it's such a back and forth contest. First of all, you guys won 7-6, walk off from Tanner McCoy, bottom 9. I mean, literally, you can't write a script better than what happened. It's funny because a lot of times for instance, we just experienced a Super Bowl that for many Eagles fans was a great day, but to be honest, it almost seemed anticlimactic, right? Like, it wasn't a game at all. I mean, obviously, maybe as a player, you would have wanted a 20-0 game, but honestly, like, isn't this more rewarding to battle back multiple times only to walk it off in the end of the game? I mean, to me, I would think that would be the case.
Yeah, just to touch on, like, just that, not in the Super Bowl win, but, like, I remember both times that the Eagles won. That first game against the Patriots was way more memorable just because it was such a back-and-forth game, just similar to this one where I knew going in. We knew it was going to be a close game. We knew that we had several battles with Williamson Trade throughout the year, and we knew that both teams were going to be up for the task. And just going in, I knew it would be a good game. I didn't realize it would be like that. I mean, that was easily one of the most crazy games I've ever played in my life.
Well, it started off innocently enough, 2-0 in the bottom of the second for Williamson Trade to come back, put 3 in the top of the third. Knights evened it up in the bottom of the third and added 2 more in the bottom of the fifth. It looked like the Knights were starting to pull away 5-3, only for Williamson to tack on 3 in the top of the sixth, which left the Knights behind by 1, and they evened the game with an Owens-L base hit, which I will always remember the call on that, with 2 strikes, 2 outs, and to tie the game. And then, of course, the Tanner McCoy bases loaded single won the game. I mean, I think it's fair to say, and I think Wyatt would probably tell you the same thing, is, that probably wasn't one of his best starts of the season. He gutted through. He definitely didn't have the command that he had earlier in the season, and did allow three runs in 4 innings. But I got to give him a lot of credit. Even though he didn't have his best stuff that day, he gutted through some really, really tough at-bats and made some pitches when he needed to help limit the damage to only 3 in those first couple of innings.
Yeah, I remember having several conversations with him in between the innings, and him just telling me, he was like, I can't grip I'm struggling to throw my curveball, I'm struggling to throw this, I'm struggling to throw that. I'm like, dude, you just got to go out and just whatever you got, just throw it at him. I'm like, honestly, I'm not saying like just throw the ball and like wherever it goes, but like, honestly, you just got to dig deep and just keep going, because obviously if whatever you have in the tank, this is the most important game of the year, so you just got to go out and throw it. And he understood. We had several conversations. He's like, yeah, listen, I'm just going to do whatever I can to try and help this team win. I'm going to do that. And he did a very good job of just battling through, even though he didn't have his best stuff.
And even though when you look at the stat sheet, Zachary Hafner had a very similar line, 4 innings, 5 hits, 3 earned, 4 strikeouts. You want to talk about battling, he made it through some really, really strong innings to help keep the Knights in the game. Brady, I know that you didn't catch Zach in this game, but do you recall those 4 innings that he came in and really, for the most part, shut those bats down until I believe it was the 6th inning that he allowed a couple of runs, but otherwise he put up zeros.
Yeah, I mean, baseball is one of those sports it's definitely a momentum sport. Once Hafner came in and he set a new tone, it kind of dwindled the morale of Williams and Trade and kind of gave us a chance to turn our bats up and come back and make it a better game. That gave us a little bit of momentum, and the momentum switched quite a few times in that game. And then luckily it came back in our favor at the very end. But for sure, Zach Hafner had one great outing to give us a chance.
And his last outing ever for Central Penn as a graduate. I want to talk just briefly about the bottom of the 8th and the bottom of the 9th. So it's 6-5. You're going to the bottom of the 8th. And I'm sitting there, and I just remember looking over to Steve and saying, I really hope that I'm making sense here, because I was so involved and invested in the game. There were times that I forgot that I'm there to call the game. We took one small break, and I'm like, Steve, if I'm like out in left field, like, please help rein me in, because I have called, I believe I tried to count this before. Let's just call it 100 plus sporting events, probably north of that, but let's just use that as a barometer. This was the first time that I had ever called a game at Central Penn College or anywhere that I was seriously nervous about the outcome. Not that I've never been nervous in a game before. I mean, I'm invested in the game. I'm locked in, but I also know that I have a job to do. This is the first time that like the fan in me came out while I'm in the middle of calling this game, and it was such a challenge to actually call the game. And that's part of the reason why I've watched back so many times. So let's go bottom 8 with that Owens-L base hit that snuck through the right side to score the tying run.
Yeah, so I was in the dugout for a majority of the game because obviously I knew that I was just going to be there and I was just going to be cheering on the team. That was my job that day. I literally just wanted to do anything I could to try and, boost morale and, get the energy up in the dugout. At that point, there was a chance that I was maybe going to come in relief, so I wasn't even in the dugout when that happened. I wish I was, but there was a chance I was starting ready to go get warmed up, and I saw the whole way that inning was breaking down, and then Owen come up. I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, I know this is a pressure place, but there's honestly not really too many other people on the team that I'd want up in this situation. Just someone that is obviously I've played with. I came to this school with a couple of years ago. And he's just one of the better, contact players I've ever seen in my life. And I knew, I was like, there's not a person I'd rather have up in the situation. And he came through. Even when it got down to 2 strikes, I'm like, he's got it. And I just remember the hit. I remember seeing him run up the first baseline, and then obviously the eruption of the crowd. The biggest thing I remember for that moment was seeing him point to the first base dugout after he got the hit. And in my head, I'm thinking, like, yes, that is so massive.
What about the thought process of putting in Zach Boyer to pitch the 9th? Zach, an accomplished pitcher, but didn't really pitch much last year, at least in the home games that I saw. I knew he did pitch a couple games, but for somebody who'd maybe pitched 10 innings last year, why was he the person that Coach went to in that tie ball game, top 9 ESAC Championship game?
So there was a game where we played at Penn State Brandywine. I think it might have been like a week or two prior, and he came in like later in the game. I think it might have been like the 8th or 9th inning, whatever it was, and he came in and dominated. And that was also a very close game that we had going with them. And then he just straight came in, shut the door, and it almost kind of like in the moment where Coach was like, who else am I going to go to? Screw it. Just go to him because we know he's going to come in, do exactly what we need to do, throw strikes and get outs. And that's exactly what he did, and that was absolutely exactly what we needed in that top of the ninth inning after coming back in the bottom of the eighth.
3 up, 3 down, 2 strikeouts. Brady, talk us through the bottom of the ninth.
It was tight. I was very nervous watching this. Coming in and seeing all of this going on and feeling the environment in the dugout, my heart was racing the entire time. And then, obviously, whenever we get to the point where we need to step up and get that run, because at the time, the game was getting very close to not being able to be finished because weather was going to be a factor. It was starting to get cloudy and ended up raining after we finished the game.
Yeah, and like all my stuff got ruined because I had to hurry up and get the equipment out of there because that was all. And I had a bunch of just, like I left a bunch of stuff over there that I've never recovered. But no, you're right. It literally right after that game, the skies opened. Of course, the walk-off single from Tanner McCoy. I did want to point out one thing. Jacob Nauman, who was the pitcher for Williamson that day, had 148 pitches. I guess my question is, and this is a question I've asked you off air, Dalton, why in the world, you mean to tell me in a winner-take-all championship final Nauman pitched great, I mean, throughout the day, but you could tell by the time the 8th inning rolled around that he was done. Why did they run him back out there in the 9th?
I'm going to be honest, as someone that's on the other team, even I'm not sure. Pitching is just such a weird thing where it's almost like in its own right. Obviously, baseball in itself is a momentum thing, but even pitching in its own is a momentum thing, and it's a big mental battle more so than it is physical. Like, obviously, physically daunting, he was absolutely exhausted. But at that point, you're like, I'm throwing a great game. This is mine to either win or lose. Even that you're at 140 plus pitches, you're just at the point where it's like, I don't trust anybody else coming in this game. I need to finish this out.
I just, again, I'm a commentator. I'm not a coach. I would have never sent him out there for the 9th inning. I don't care who. Yeah. I don't care who had thrown that week. I don't care. Someone else is going in that game because basically what happened was he got one out, allowed the bases loaded, and then Tanner got a single after battling through his at bat. So just unbelievable. Immense congratulations. I'm sure that you've gotten tons of congratulations. Now, Tyler, as somebody who we'd been talking off air, you said that you'd committed far before the season and that you were watching the game. What was it like for you as a commit to come in here and see such a, number one, an amazing game, but to be a part of this back-to-back championship team?
I mean, it was very special. I mean, watching it, I made a point to watch it, because I knew what it meant, and it meant something to me. I hadn't suited up. I hadn't put the jersey on yet, but it meant something to me, for these guys to win, knowing that I was arriving in a program that would be back-to-back ESAC champions, So, I mean, it was very special to watch. I remember watching the Tanner at-bat. It was a hard-fought at-bat, and he got the job done. And, that kind of describes, I think, the team as a whole last year. I watched other games. I was at other games. Just as a whole, getting the job done was, I think, the theme you could really look at last year.
And obviously, we'd be remiss to move to this season without talking about the new coach. So can you, and we are going to be posting something along on the CPC Nightly News about the new coach, something that Owen Zell wrote for us. But tell us a little bit more about this transition to coaches, and tell us a little bit more about Coach and anything that you might think the listeners out there would be interested in hearing.
So obviously, for being here for now my 4th year, and just being a part of the atmosphere that Coach Robert Stern, built, it was definitely a little bit of a culture shock. Obviously, I mean, you get a new coaching staff, they have a whole different way of running things. It's going to be a little bit different, but honestly, I can safely say that it's pretty much, I've picked up pretty well with what I bought into what he's teaching us. I mean, his big thing is simply whenever your name is called, step up and do your job. And everybody is held accountable. There's not a single person on the team that is given any more opportunity just because of who they are. It's simply just based on who they think can get the job done in a certain spot. And I mean, as a that's who he is as a coach. As a person, he's a great person. I mean, he cares a lot about this team, and he has said to us several times that if we just do what we're supposed to do, we can pretty much accomplish anything we want to, which not only just three-peating as ESAC championships, but also making a run at the Small College World Series.
This was my problem, and anyone who watched this game certainly can go back and see this, and I will fully cop to this. I was unaware during the ESAC Championship game last year that the Small College World Series bids were already announced, thinking that if you guys won this game, that would certainly look good on your resume. No reason why you wouldn't be invited. Well, here I'm looking like an idiot the whole time because they had announced literally the day before, and unfortunately Central Penn didn't get in. I'm sitting here still trying to wonder, a 22-12 record, an ESAC conference, like how in the world and again, this is probably just a rhetorical question here. I don't know that you have the answer for all of this. How are you left out?
I'll say, so a big thing that goes into the bids, a lot of the thing is it's strength of schedule. And it's not to say that we didn't play tough teams, because we did. We played Albright. We played Penn State Brandywine, and we beat Penn State Brandywine. And honestly, it was upsetting because I thought that was our best chance to make it in. And even before the game, it's obviously it's not worth nothing because obviously I still want to go win the ESAC championship.
Correct.
But it's kind of upsetting because I'm we had a really good record and we beat some pretty good teams. And even some of the games we lost against better teams, we competed. So
it just bothers me that as a conference within the USCAA, with the ESAC conference, that winning the conference doesn't get you any type of entry into, and I understand that that's something that I've talked to Casey about, and that last season we were not an automatic bid conference. I'm just hoping that changes at some point, because whether it's a few years back Bucks or us the last 2 years, there's no reason why we shouldn't have at least had the opportunity to go play in a Small College World Series.
No, yeah, absolutely.
So again, it's more just a thought than anything else. All right, well, let's turn the page on that. I guess the question remains, though, what do you have to do to get to the Small College World Series at this point?
Well, we already got
win every game. I mean,
well, again, we already got off to a really good start because Mid-Atlantic Christian, they were in the Small College World Series last year. And they have a pretty similar roster to the one that we faced last year. And we went out and took care of business. So, honestly, the big thing now is just any time that we have a chance where there's a game where we know going in that if we do what we're supposed to do, we can win, we're going to have to do it. Obviously, we have scheduled some, some pretty big games this year, like against Clarion, who's going to be a very tough opponent. We have a couple other ones that I can't really think of off the top of my head, but I think that's going to be
just out of these are just teams that you haven't played before, other than some of the Penn State branch campuses. You got Kings, Lancaster Bible College, Notre Dame College of Maryland, Clarion for a doubleheader, the next to last series of the season. So you've got some really solid competition, and of course, all of the Penn State schools are tough to varying levels.
To give ourselves the best opportunity to make it in. Obviously, if we can come away with a win against some of those tougher teams, that'd be great. I think just the biggest thing that we can do is winning a very large majority of our conference games. And then, honestly, I think if we could win anywhere north of, I'd say 25 to 27, or even more than that, that would give us a very, very good chance of making it.
It's just frustrating to me because it almost gets you to the point where you have to put so much pressure on yourself every single game to win every single game. And almost like in college football, trying to tack on extra runs when, baseball of any game is a sportsman's game, if you ask me. And that's not really a cool thing to do, kicking people when they're down. And does that go into your thought process this year? Like, oh my God, we got to win every game if we literally have no room for error if we want to make the Small College World Series?
Well, I mean, I would say that it also didn't help that we lost a lot of close games. Yes, we had a great record, but there were definitely a couple of games that were close. So this year, I think we're going to try and make it an emphasis to win those close games, and that'll give us a much better chance at getting there this year.
So, Tyler, you're coming in as listed as an outfield first baseman. What drew you to Central Penn, other than, of course, the back-to-back ESAC championships?
I think the ability that I can progress within my baseball abilities, that was the opportunity to play early on and really have a role. I'm a defender in the outfield, and that's my job, and that was clear cut to me. When Coach Stern was recruiting me, he made that very clear cut. I might not get the at-bats this year, but I will get the opportunity somewhere, and then it builds from that, and I control my own destiny. And that real side of it, like the real approach that he had with me, drew me a lot. I mean, I had an offer from Kings. I mean, that's a school we play this year. That's a game that I really want, personally, but they didn't give me that same approach. I have injury history. I have really bad injury history with my knees, and Kings blatantly told me, if you get hurt, you're on the scrap heap, and you're never going to get a job back. That's kind of basically I was pointed from. I've known maybe 3 or 4 guys that have went there, and it's the pitchers. They hurt their elbow, and they don't get that job. They don't get that shot. I knew a kid played middle infield. He wasn't even a bad injury. He fractured his collarbone. It's not really something that overly affects your play. I don't really think he never got that shot back, and he was starting a decent amount of games. So, I think the idea that we're real people and real players, and it was addressed more in a way that I wanted to be addressed as a player, and that was huge. That was the biggest thing.
Well, Tyler, I do want to point out what's really interesting as I look back on this particular team is the veteran leadership. But you also have to remember a lot of these folks you're talking about being in their final year of eligibility. You're talking about people like Dalton, of course. Brady's playing his last year. Owen Zell is in his last year. Colby Criswell is in his last year. And even Colton Zerbe's in his last year. So you have a lot of people who after the season are going to move on. So that does, the future is bright for someone like you. And not only that, the legacy that this fine baseball program has left at this point, you're going to be an integral piece of this program down the road, and I hope that you take that away and soak up everything you can from these folks who are playing their last season here with the Knights.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely the guys that are playing their last seasons. I got 2 guys right next to me, Brady, Dalton. I've asked them a million questions about just anything, but even the older guys that are still going to be here, guys like Gabe Kaufman, Nick Joseph, David Thomas.
I don't even look like these guys are old guys. Gosh, they're only sophomores, right?
Yeah, sophomores and stuff like that. But I still look at them a lot for advice on stuff, and
that just goes to show you they were freshmen last year or over the last couple of years, and they played some pretty significant roles on the team.
Yeah, someone I ask a lot about some stuff too is DT David. I just kind of. He is very vocal. He's a vocal person. So, you search for someone like that to look to as a freshman. Gabe, I hang around Gabe a lot. He can smash the ball, and that's somewhere I lack in my game. And same thing with Nick Joseph. He can smash the ball, so I just stand there, I just watch, and I try to learn from these guys, And it's a process. I know that I'm not going to come in and be, Ken Griffey in the outfield today, but you give me time, you give these other freshmen time, and I think that's a consensus with all the freshmen. Give us time, let us learn, and we're gonna be solid.
We'll take the last 5 minutes of the show. Give me a sort of a once-over about what Knights fans can expect from the team this year. Of course, a few of those players aren't there. Of course, Zach Boyer moved on and rolled through the sunset. Of course, there were some other seniors last year who also graduated. But tell us who's going to step into some of those roles and tell us what we can expect for the games coming up this season.
Yeah, so I'm going to be honest. Our big thing is just being the best version of ourselves. And I think a part of that is just having accountability and just simply put, whenever our name is called, to do the job. I think for fans coming to the games, I think they're going to see, personally, in my opinion, the most clean version of the Knights that they've probably ever seen. I think all across the board, pitching, just throwing strikes and commanding the strike zone and getting quick outs. Hitters just having professional at-bats and working counts, doing whatever they need to do to get guys on, get them in, and get them in. And I think just the big thing that I think that they're going to see is just every single inning, 1 through 7 or 1 through 9, if it's a single 9-inning game, just being in it and fighting the entire time to do whatever needs to be done to get the win.
And so, again, Knights fans will know, of course, Wyatt Kozer, Colton Zerbe. Who are the other really important pitchers that are coming into or maybe are going to have an elevated role over last season?
Another person, Cam Smiley. He was in my opinion, our best starter last year. He's going to be doing the same thing. He's going to be one of our main guys in the starting position and also getting a lot of catching time. But in terms of incoming guys that are coming in and very, very key relievers, Gavin Jones and Joao Morales, they're definitely going to be very big
Well,
But-
Morales already picked up a save in the first contest.
Yes, he did. And they can honestly fill in any role, whether you need him to come in and stop bleeding early on, you need him to come in and close a game like he did. Also, some other guys like Mark Culp, whatever, whether it's starting, middle relief, closing roles, or setup, whatever, what have you, they're going to come in and just do what they need to do every time.
Brady, on the offensive side of the ball, of course, we'd already mentioned people like Gabe Kaufman, David Thomas, of course, Owen Zell, Tanner McCoy. Who are some other offensive bats that you can see making an impact in 2025?
I can see Terrell Smith. I can see him making a big impact. He already kind of helped us a little bit in the first game. Harvey had a big game, had a home run in our first game. He's going to make a big impact.
Who is a fantastic two-way player, also get some time on the mound.
Yes, he is. Let's see, who else is there? Kyle. Yes, Kyle's a freshman coming in. He's going to make a big impact for us.
Kyle Brent listed at third base and catcher.
Yep. Maybe not immediately, but I honestly think that Tyler will be a good impact because I've watched him from afar, obviously, because I'm working with the catchers and pitchers most of the time. But watching Tyler from afar, he's made some pretty good improvements with his bat. So I feel like those couple people that we've mentioned can make a big impact.
Also think Brian Lowen, too.
Yes.
You could plug him in, honestly, anywhere in the infield, second, third, short. He can come in both defensively and offensively.
Schedule at centralpennknights.com. Click on the baseball schedule, and you can see all of these scheduled games. But I do want to point out a couple of other really important games. We have Community Night on Wednesday, April 16th versus Williamson Trade, and then I'm sorry to say I'm going to miss this one, but Bucks County, of course, we will still do the broadcast. We're going to have the B team, if you will, covering the Bucks County game. It's going to be April 18th. I will actually be in New Orleans at a conference, unfortunately, but I'll be tuned in while I'm at the conference, making sure that everything's going well. So again, April 16th on Wednesday versus Williamson Trade for Community Night, and Friday, April 18th versus Bucks County. Both are 4 and 6, and then Senior Day. One single 9-inning game versus Penn State Fayette on April 30th. So those are all games that you want to mark down on your calendars. Gentlemen, it's been my pleasure to get to have you on the show, and we'd love to have you back at some point toward the end of the season and see how everything went. So, Brady, I want to thank you and hope you enjoyed your time on the show today.
I definitely enjoyed my time.
It's our pleasure. And Dalton, certainly, what else can I say? But thank you for everything that you've done as a Nightly News Media Club member and now co-president. I look forward to seeing you out there on the mound.
All 4 years being a part of the baseball team of the Nightly News.
Right around the time that this podcast gets released. And Tyler Haynes, thank you so much for taking the time today, and I appreciate your perspective about what it was like to be a part of this team, be a part of everything that's going on, and also kind of walking us through down memory lane from the ESAC Championship game as a recruit.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to be part of it now, not be watching from the outside. We're gonna go back again. I'm 100% confident in that. Confident in our guys, and go Knights.
And fingers crossed that if you can bring home another East, I know we're only one game into the season, so we got a long season to go, but if you win the ESAC Championship game this season and don't get an invite to the Small College World Series, I'm going to find the commissioners from the USCAA, and I'm going to pay them a little visit and find out what's going on, because it's getting a little ridiculous. But all right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Nightly News Podcast. I want to thank Brady Park, Dalton Koller, and Tyler Haynes for joining us today on our baseball preview. You can always check out everything about the Knights, from live stats and schedules, roster, and statistics at centralpennknights.com. But until then, this is Professor Paul Miller, and we'll see you again next time on the Nightly News Podcast.